This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Welcome to 2020. God, I sound like Barbara Walters. I think I've seen those memes go around. Anyway, welcome to the first episode of the Courage to Rise podcast for 2020. I want to share a little tip that I just saw that has absolutely nothing to do with the content of the podcast and everything to do with 2020. I read an article that said that when you sign documents, legal documents, we're so used to just putting the last two digits, write 2020. Because if you just write 20, then somebody could come back and fill in another date, like 2019. So anyway, that's a little tip from me to you that has nothing to do with personal growth or podcasting, but there's a little education in every show. So I have a plan for a podcast series that I'm going to do on breakups and healing, because that's something that's come up a lot. But the episode that I want to do today is about an experience that I had on a flight recently, because sometimes the universe likes to test me and say, okay, life coach, are you really walking the talk? Are you really living this? Are you really practicing what you preach? And I want to share this incident that happened to me because it illustrates so many points and so many things. And if nothing else, the moral of the story is always be nice to the person next to you on the plane, or you might end up on their podcast. So after Christmas, I flew down to Costa Rica to attend an amazing retreat. And I've been to Costa Rica many times over the years. In fact, this was my 17th trip, but this was to a part of Costa Rica I'd never been to before. So I was excited about it for all different reasons. And on my flight down, the morning I left, I woke up and I really just wasn't feeling good. I had a headache. I was just not, wasn't in peak form. And I've been a frequent flyer for 17 years. So I basically, you kind of go through the motions. You do this all in your sleep. And I give that context because I literally still to this very minute have no idea what this fellow passenger took issue with about me specifically. But I boarded the plane, put my bags up, I sat down, I put my headphones in, and closed my eyes because it just, like I said, it was kind of in my own little world, wasn't feeling good. And the woman in the middle seat started out by offering me and the window seat passenger some of her cookies from the previous flight. And I said, no, thank you. Closed my eyes and went back to my own little world. I don't know whether I offended her somehow. I don't know whether I reminded her of a girl that was mean to her in school. I don't know whether maybe she had just found out her husband was cheating and I looked like his mistress. But when I tell you that this woman decided that I was her mortal enemy, I'm not exaggerating. I have never had anyone be so rude to me in my life. Somebody that, especially a complete stranger. But, we take off and we get above 10,000 feet. And as soon as the seatbelt sign goes off, I get up, I go to the bathroom, come back, sit down, put my seatbelt back on, close my eyes. And then I hear, I have to get up. I'm like, all right, well, that sounds a little harsh and probably could have figured that out before I sat down, but okay, cool. It's all good. So I get up and let her out. She comes back. She doesn't say anything to me. She just gives me this nasty look. Okay. And I'm going, all right, well, she must be having a bad day. So she gets in, I sit down, close my eyes. Again, she says, I have to get up. Okay. I get up again, let her out, sit back down. Every time she does this repeatedly, okay? Every time she does this, she's a little bit ruder. A couple other things transpire that I won't go into all the things that happened along the way. But the last time I'm sitting there, I'm going, this woman is having a bad day. And I thought maybe it was just, it wasn't specific to me. She's just having a bad day. Well, she starts talking to the guy in the window seat. And at one point turns her head toward me and says out loud, "People are just the worst." And then turns back to him. Meanwhile, I've had my eyes closed this entire time, right? I'm trying to kick this headache. I'm just trying to, get through the flight. She gets up again. And when she comes back, she doesn't say anything to me, which is not unusual. This time, she kicks me. Now, this woman is probably, I'm guessing, in her 50s. She's pretty well dressed. She's traveling with a dog. Let's just say she seems like she would be old enough to know how to behave in public. So she kicks me. And I stand up and I say, "Please and thank you work just as well." And she says, "Not for you, they don't." And sits down. So by this point, I've figured out that this is really something that she has against me personally, right? This is not just about she's having a bad day and she's taking it out on everybody. She's taking it out on me. And like I said, several other things transpired through the flight. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that there was a time in my younger years where I would probably be on the no-fly list by now, because I would have retaliated against her. I would have engaged in this. I would have possibly asked her who the fuck pissed in her Cheerios this morning. I would have engaged in the same sort of passive-aggressive behavior that she was giving to me. There's a chance I would have ordered a glass of something and accidentally gotten clumsy and spilled it on her. Okay? Being honest here. And these are the things that go through your head. But here's the thing. I saw this as an opportunity. I saw this as an opportunity because it was a big test. Because one of the things that I talk a lot about is how important it is for us to do our own healing, and how so much that happens really has nothing to do with us. But because we're coming from a place of feeling not enough, of feeling slighted, of getting triggered, and we fall into these patterns of making other people our adversaries. And it was literally a universal, I hate to say test, but it was a bit of a test to say, okay, here's a woman who's really being truly horrible to you. Can you practice what you preach? And so all the time that this is transpiring, the first thing I did was think through what had transpired on the flight and try to figure out, because I was curious, and I'm still kind of curious, what it was about me that set her off. Because again, I consider myself a very considerate flyer. I've been doing it for a long time. And I don't know what it was that set her off. But the point is, it was really about her. There was something that happened, and she was choosing to act that way. Unconsciously, but she was choosing to act that way toward me. And I sat there with my eyes closed, and I breathed, because there is still a physiological response. There is that sort of fight or flight reaction. And it's nowhere near as intense, but I still had it. And I tell you that so that you know that it's normal, because it's kind of like you're being attacked, right? I mean, really, on a fundamental level, we still are evolutionary, beings. We haven't evolved all that much from when we were on the Serengeti, and there is a little bit of a physiological response around that. And I chose to breathe through that and ask myself, what else could be going on here? Because this had nothing to do with me. Even if I had done something horrible, even if I had walked on the plane, smacked this woman in the face, and called her all manner of names out of the blue, she could choose how she responds to that, right? And so this really had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her. Okay, so that was the first thing, is I depersonalized it. All right. This didn't have anything to do with me. This is about her. She's obviously having a really bad day. And I worked through those initial impulses of wanting to get her, right? Of wanting to show her, of wanting to have like that like perfect comeback, or, like I said, maybe accidentally get clumsy and spill something on her, right? It comes up, and I'm not going to lie and say I didn't have a few fantasies about that, because that wouldn't be honest. But I also said, all right, how do I want the rest of this flight to go? And how do I want the rest of my vacation to go? Because this woman is dealing with something here. And I don't want to let her ruin the rest of my trip. And I don't want to give energy to this more than I absolutely have to. And the other thing I did is I did a practice that was given to me by one of my energy healers. And I would challenge you anytime you're dealing with something. It's a beautiful practice to do anyway, but to first of all remember that we really are all connected in this human experience. A lot of the suffering that happens is when we start to feel at odds with everyone around us, and it's me against them, or it's a group against a group. But really, no matter what, when it comes down to it, we are all human. And this woman next to me on the plane, she's a reflection of me too. We've all had bad days. She's obviously going through something. She's not handling it great, but we've all had bad days. And in that moment, what she needed from me on an energetic level, because I decided I didn't really want to engage with her at this point, what she needed from me on an energetic level was she needed love, because this is a human being that was in massive pain. And she very well may not connect what was going on for her, because she was making up a story in her head about me. I still don't know what the story is. I'm still kind of curious, but it doesn't really matter. But she was making up a story about me. And based on that story she was telling herself, she was acting out. And so I sat there with my eyes closed. I worked through the process that I just shared with you. And then I came back to, this woman needs love. And so the practice that my energy healer gave me was to literally visualize sending this person love. And sending them love. And it feels like a really hard thing to do, especially when somebody has basically attacked you, right? But that diffuses the situation. It diffuses the situation for you. And what she really needed, she didn't need me to retaliate. She didn't need me to feed into the pain she was already feeling. What this woman needed was a metric fuck ton of love. Now, you might be going, but she doesn't deserve that. Well, maybe not. But I come back to what feels better for me. And she was obviously dealing with a lot to respond to a stranger in that way. The other piece of this I want to share is that on her last trip back of so many trips, when she kicked me, I noticed that around her neck she was wearing a crucifix. Now, I have personally had to work through some things around the part of the country where I grew up, and groups of individuals that were not representing the true love of Jesus. And that was something I've had to work through. It would have been very easy for me in that moment to go back to that, to paint with a broad brush that all Christians are hypocritical. But here's the thing. This woman was wearing that symbol. What that crucifix symbolizes is love at a fundamental level. Peel away all the dogma, and Jesus was about love. She wasn't embodying that, but that was her in that moment. And probably more than anyone, she needs the reminder of what it's really about. And it reminded me that so often, and I have this conversation a lot with women who, and I say women because this is where it comes up, who want to say, oh, all men are jerks, who want to paint with a broad brush. And then sometimes you have men that'll be like, well, but all women are crazy. Or we stereotype certain religious groups or race or pick your stereotype. But here's the thing. It has nothing to do with gender. It's not about men. It's not about women. It's not about race. It's not about religion. It's about sometimes humans behave badly. Sometimes humans behave from a place of hurt and wounding, and they lash out, and they act out of alignment with love, and they act out of alignment with the words that are coming out of their mouth, or the religion that they follow, or the doctrine that they follow. This is not about men or women. It's not about religion. It's about humans. Sometimes humans behave badly. And we perpetuate that when we feed into it, when we forget that we are really all one in this human experience, that at our core, everybody has the same wounds that we're working through. That woman, God, she was in so much pain. How much pain do you have to be in to take it out on a perfect stranger who literally did nothing? How much pain must she be in that that's how she's choosing to operate in this world? My choice is to see that with compassion and to see it with love. And like I said, I'm not saying I'm a saint, because that would not have always been my choice. I would have been on the no-fly list by now, 100%. But the point is that this is why it's so critical for each one of us to own our own healing, because we can't control other people. They're going to do what they're going to do. We can control our responses and our reactions and the world that's within us, so that when we do encounter someone like that, we can show them a reflection of what they are missing within themselves, that we can give them love and grace and compassion. And I'm not saying that you have to deal with somebody physically abusing you, because I will tell you, if she kicked me again, I would have politely asked her to please stop assaulting me. And I would have addressed it much more directly. But still, she's a woman who is in need of love. And remembering that we are responsible for our own healing, so that we're not contributing and feeding into that negativity and feeding into that pain. The other thing that I want to call attention to is when you get triggered by someone, or let's stay with this situation, because this was something that I thought of too that makes for an excellent example. I've said this so many times, but I really, truly don't know what triggered her. But let's say that, from her perspective, and I put myself in her shoes, as well, maybe she felt like I was being rude to her because I had my eyes closed. Okay, let's go with that. Let's say that that's what triggered her, that I wasn't talking. Well, let's think about, what if you're her and that's the story that she was telling, hypothetically, right? Let's say that's the story she was telling, is that I was the one that was being rude because I wasn't talking to her. Ask, what if she had asked the question, what else could be going on here? Because what was really going on is I had a really bad headache and I just really needed that quiet. I really wasn't in a space to be able to interact with anybody. And this is one of the things that's such a lesson, is that when we have a wound, this is why the healing is important. Because maybe her wound was being ignored. Maybe her wound was something related to, not engaging with her in some way, or not accepting. Maybe she was pissed I didn't accept her cookies, but there was a wound that she had around it, because she created an entire story around who I was and what I was doing or not doing. But if you ask, what else could be going on here? Because maybe, and the truth is I just wasn't in a place to be interacting with anyone. Maybe somebody, if you run into somebody and you get triggered by them, or they respond in a way that isn't pleasant or triggers you, ask yourself, what else could be going on? And watch the story that you're telling, because we tell ourselves stories on a regular basis. Things transpire. Those are facts. The meaning that we make of it is where we either find our suffering or our freedom. That woman was making a meaning out of whatever it was I did or didn't do. And she was choosing a meaning around it. And maybe that meaning was that she felt I was being rude to her. But if she had asked what else could be going on, she might have come up with, maybe this woman doesn't feel good. Maybe she just really isn't in a place to interact with somebody. Maybe she's going through something herself and just needs to be quiet and go within. But that is where we want to examine the wounds that we have. And when we get triggered by something, and I've said before, that trigger is when you have that flood, that feeling of, whatever that story is that you tell around that wound that comes up, of I'm being rejected or I'm being ignored, or this throws me back to being in middle school and being, rejected by the cool girls, whatever. And when that trigger comes up for you, that's a piece of information for you around where you still have some pain and wounding. And the way that we break the cycle, the way that I'm not kidding when I say that if we all do this work, this is how we help create a more peaceful world. Because so many times, and I say this from personal experience because I think about all the times that I've responded to a story that I was telling myself about being rejected or being ignored or being made insignificant. And how many times do we respond to that rather than asking what else could really be going on? So when you have a trigger like that, if somebody triggers you, check in with what that wound is with you, and then ask yourself what's really going on. Ask yourself what else could be going on here? What's a different meaning that I could make of this? Because if that woman had decided that, wow, if she was really healthy, if she was aligned, and she'd go, wow, this girl's, she said no thank you to my cookies. Maybe she doesn't like cookies. Maybe she's just having a bad day. Maybe she just needs some quiet time. Rather than making it a personal story. And again, I'm just using that as an example because God knows what triggered her. I've said that multiple times because I'm still kind of baffled by it. But the point is, that's when we get triggered by things, we create stories around them, and then we respond and react out of that wounding to those stories. So remember, first of all, people need more love, not less. We all need more love and more compassion. Ultimately, we are all human. We're all asking, am I enough? Am I worthy of love? We all have wounds. We all have things that have hurt us. And so see that, go within yourself and look at what comes up for you. Ask what else could be going on when you're in a situation like that, and decide that you're going to choose peace. You're going to choose love. If nothing else, when you're in a situation like that, when you're really triggered, the other question that I ask myself in this moment was, when I look back on this, how do I want to feel about how I handled it? And these questions, the breathing, the checking in with yourself, they're all pattern interrupts for reacting to triggers and creating more suffering and pain where we don't have to be feeding into that. So I want to offer my sincere thanks to this woman, wherever your final destination was. I hope that you had a better rest of the day, and I wish you a lot of love and a lot of healing. And thank you for being a teaching tool for me to use and share on my podcast. Remember, kids, always be nice to strangers, or you'll end up on their podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.